The field of economics is a joke right now. Whoever has a degree in economics should feel useless. They should seriously go over in the corner and cry. Entire economics libraries burned down, or should I say recycled, because everything on this planet is part of a circle. Nothing goes to waste. What economics never got was that in order to grow something, something else needs to get smaller. And all this time, guess what has been getting smaller so that we can grow? Nature, resources, habitats, clean water, life. So forget growth. Growth is dead. It is a magician's trick. Stuff doesn't just magically appear and disappear. The molecules in your body didn't come out of nowhere. They have been on this planet for 3.5 billion years. When you die, your body turns into organic mush. You become delicious food for the other beings on the planet that take over from you. And the circle begins again and again. So where did it all go wrong? Economics itself is wrong by its very existence, its very foundation, because it was built on the concept of profit, a concept that makes no sense in a circular system. So please, do away with the calculators, economic theories, lectures, banks, stock markets, and graphs, endless graphs. It's all completely useless. Our failure goes back to even before money actually existed. Our whole civilization was set up the wrong way. Eat, eat, eat. Destroy, destroy, destroy. Eat more, destroy more. Eat even more, destroy even more. Shit everything out as CO2. This was our definition of economic growth.
I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. Today we speak with a poet and a piercing social commentator, George Tsakraklides. Get ready for some spot-on analysis of what we're facing in these times with medium author George Tsakraklides. All right, welcome back to the Poetry of Predicament podcast. And what a remarkably busy week this is, where multiple huge fires in California, extraordinary political hubbub going on as usual in the USA and in the UK with Brexit, and elsewhere around the world in so many different troubling ways. And this has also been an extraordinarily busy week here in podcast world, where I just had the real pleasure of meeting and then having some wonderful conversations. And today is no exception. George Tsakraklides, man, I know I'm still not quite saying it right. It's a struggle for me to kind of get my mouth around a lot of consonants. And thank you for your patience with me attempting, George. George is a relative newcomer to a writing site that I respect a great deal, Medium. And in a very short time, George, you're writing both your poetry and your prose, your analysis, really more accurately, it really struck a chord with me. It's rare that I get that combination of an artfulness and a dead-on accuracy to what I believe is actually going on in our world. And so the analysis is as valuable and as rich as the poetic side or the prose side of what you do. And so it's really been a pleasure to meet you in the past few minutes before we hit the record button. And I'm just really happy that you are here. Turns out we've got a few different places where I think we overlap from time to time, whether we know it or not. So it's a pleasure to expand that in a conscious way, those intersections. So George, thank you so much for showing up and for joining me here and us here on the podcast. And let me just read a couple of sentences that you've written about yourself in Medium, and then ask you to fill in some gaps, anything that you'd like to add to that autobiographical couple of sentences. George is a molecular biologist, food scientist, advocate for an earth of empathy, gratitude, compassion, and awareness. He's a recovering workaholic and author of Age of Separateness. George Tsakraklides, welcome to the Poetry of Predicament.
It is lovely to be here, Dean. Thank you very much for inviting me.
All right. Anything you'd like to add to that, those couple of sentences about yourself?
I would like to remove something, actually. I think that all of us, as we grow up and mature in life, we think we have a path and that we are progressing in an additive way, adding degrees. Became a degree junkie at some point in my life. And we all reached that point, at least I reached that point where I thought I was somewhere, until the climate crisis came into view, as well as other side effects of the climate crisis that I was experiencing in my immediate environment, whether it was people getting sick or people having bad work experiences. And I just would like to add that I am all of the above, but above all, I am a work in progress. And we are all on a journey.
Yeah. Yes. Amen. We are all works in progress. And there's a particular way of describing that work in progress-ness that you're mentioning. There's a particular way of talking about it that I'm fond of using, and that's to describe that state of being aware of the malleability and the evolutionary quality moment by moment that we are invited to live into, calling it the liquid state. And it's for the average person who's not familiar with this as being something natural and something that actually promises an extraordinary growth into a new state of being. For a lot of people, this can be a state to be feared, to be retracted from, and rigidified against.
Conditions us to believe that we have a distinct identity. I'm a dentist, you are a therapist, you are this, everyone is completely unique, and everyone is on a journey to discover truth. I think that our circumstances and degrees that we study or countries that we live are just different lenses through which we experience life. And it's not so much about what you've studied or who you are or what you do. It's about how you use that lens, how you use that information to learn from it. For me, writing is a catharsis. Writing is a way to cleanse my sins as a human being on this planet, and to bring other people with me, to bring other people into a collective awareness of where we are. When I read my own writings, my own poems, I feel touched by them, and I feel I feel a connection with people. The language is a powerful tool.
Yeah. Yeah, it truly is. You know, we both connected to some degree or another with the relatively recently created Deep Adaptation forum that was created by Jem Bendell in 28, well, actually in this year, earlier this year, but his kind of rocket to notoriety happened in 2018. And just for those who aren't yet familiar with the deep adaptation notion, Bendell came from a background of academics. He's professor of sustainability development in the UK. And he really took a tremendous risk by publishing his paper about what he's calling deep adaptation in early 2018. And right in the center of what he's talking about is an acknowledgement that not only is there really no sustainable version of our predatory capitalist system, but even more, I think, daring is his declaration of that we are in the midst of collapse now. And what was how he couched it at the beginning in 2018 in his paper was that it's imminent social collapse was going to be coming from how we do things, how we do this human operating system. And since then, it's become quite clear to him, and in his subsequent papers and presentations, that no, it's going on now. And yes, there will be more and more dramatic elements of collapse in our world, both human and earth systems, but it is actually going on now. And that's what I keep reading in your writing as well. And I just noticed before we hit the record button today, as we were just meeting on this call, you mentioned something about being a little reluctant to use the word collapse. I'm wondering if you could say more about that.
Yeah, I mean, collapse, I think, is a bit of a misleading word in the sense that collapse sounds as if something is happening suddenly, like a building collapsing, and that there is a specific cutoff point beyond which you know that you are in collapse. I don't think any of those things are true, and I don't think that goes against what Jem Bendell is saying. I completely agree with him that we are in the midst of collapse. We may still be able to have food in the supermarket, but all the wheels have been set in motion. We are in the sixth mass extinction. We are in the middle, well underway, of an ecological collapse, to use a scientific term, an ecosystem collapse, which is you all of a sudden have lots of species starting to disappear. And then this process, of course, accelerates because all of the species are connected. One of my degrees is in biology, so it's a very, very simple concept. And I think, to be honest, most people get that. But I do think collapse is a bit of a misleading word because it makes some people feel that it's really dramatic, which it's not necessarily, depending on which part of the world you live. And it makes some other people feel the opposite. It makes some other people feel that actually collapse is something that will happen at some point in time. And until then, until the last minute, we're going to be okay. My fear, and this is well into most of my writings, is that humans are very adaptable. And although that is good, sometimes being adaptable is also very bad because we are witnessing collapse at the moment and we are used to it. We are becoming used to swimming in our own excrement. Sorry for the ugly picture, but this is what humanity does, and we have witnessed collapse before. I think this is the other thing that people don't realize, that collapse has happened multiple times in our civilization. Um, it just has not happened on a planetary, global scale. It hasn't happened as in the form of the final collapse, which this would be the final collapse. Not necessarily the extinction of the species, but it will be quite an unrecognizable planet, the way things are going. So that's my view on collapse. I just think it's a much broader term that needs to be felt. I think that some of the posts that I see on Deep Adaptation are a bit, for example, you see people talking about how they are pickling vegetables and saying, oh, I'm getting ready for the collapse. I don't think it's like that. It's like I said, it's not going to happen from one day to another, and you don't even know if pickling is going to be a skill that will help you survive. All of us, we don't know where we're heading, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We have no idea whether it's going to be electricity that goes out first, or apples, or we just don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Thank you. It's fascinating to me. I'm connected with many people that have crossed themselves over the threshold, who call themselves collapse aware, and there's a continuum beyond that goes all the way to the folks who put themselves into the category of near-term human extinction people. So there's quite a range of severity of voting for this is what's going to happen, and this is how we must define collapse, and this is what will happen. And various people have their own version of a timeline that they're estimating and so on. I'd like to just go back to, I mentioned to you that there was another article that I'd like to just bounce off of a little bit with you in our conversation. And it's one that you've called, again, it's in Medium, and you call it the Nothing Manifesto, Revolution of Nothing. Yeah. And there are many ways that I like this piece. And particularly it rings with how you're just kind of delineating your take on collapse. And it also overlaps with why I named my own, the only book I've ever written. A couple of years ago, I put out The Impossible Conversation. And that was actually what I'm about to mention from your article is exactly why I named it The Impossible Conversation. And that is, we are so encased these days in the mythology of infinite growth on a finite planet. And our little roles, each of us take on our particular version of a good contributor to the infinite growth paradigm. We do our version of it and hold up our end of it. And I'm hard pressed, I can't imagine a harder addiction to break than the addiction to this system, this fossil fuel driven extravaganza that we're in. of consumption and production and extraction and so on that you articulate so well. And in this particular piece that you've written, you give us a number of different elements that it would be really good for a person who's interested in proceeding on this track of hopefully shaking loose of this addiction. What are some of the premises? What are some of the distinctions? What are some of the understandings that I would need if I was a person who wanted to find some other way of being than deeply addicted to this system? And you kind of carve it out by saying, what if we did nothing? You know, reflecting on or contrasting with, in this system, we pride ourselves on doing more and more and more, faster and faster. And as you said in the other piece, eat more, destroy more, destroy more. And what more stark contrast than doing nothing? So let me just swing open that gate about this other article. And I'm wondering if this sparks you to say anything.
Yeah, I mean, we are addicted not just to fossil fuels. This goes back to the start of our civilization. We are addicted to ambition as a species. And this is making us consume and purchase things that we don't need, that have absolutely tremendous CO2 footprint. What is really interesting is how this complicated, complex lifestyle and civilization that we developed all comes down to just one single molecule, CO2. Isn't that ironic? Because it's both mental and physical. It's, in fact, the mental is the biggest challenge, because the solution is not about shutting down a few coal mines and putting up some wind turbines and sucking up CO2 out of the air. The scale of the change that we need to do can only happen if we feel in our hearts how wrong our life is. And it's very, very difficult to do that, because, I mean, we grew up in this life from, you know, I grew up with refrigerators and electricity around the house, and it's very difficult to understand that, you know, growing beef is wrong, that we're using something like 70% of the Earth's land mass to grow crops. And I mean, we obviously reached the limit of that, and that figure might be inaccurate, but it's still, the real figure is absolutely shocking. And because it's what I learned from my scientific career was that when you have such a complicated, complex problem, it is ironic that the solution is usually a very simple solution. And the simple solution here is do nothing. Do less as humanity. Leave Earth alone. I think Ethiopia is a fantastic example. They are simply putting fences around huge areas so that those pastures are not accessible to cattle. And what they're seeing is that the landscape is recovering. There are rivers that are flowing out of nowhere. It's a miracle if you just leave Earth alone. And there's a number of ways that we can do that, but
George, you just broke up when you were saying where they were putting up fences to allow it to recover. Where was that you were describing?
It's in Ethiopia.
Ethiopia, thank you.
But you have also examples in Western Europe where urbanization is leading to villages in the countryside being abandoned. And in fact, the total forested area in Europe over the last few decades has grown by about the size of Switzerland. So these are the few glimmers of hope that things are possible. But I think that hope is a very dangerous word. And this is why I'm very skeptical of big words and slogans like the Green New Deal. These have already been hijacked. And this is by no means a critique on Naomi Klein's book. I think she's very much aware of this risk, and I deeply respect her as an author. I think that she would agree with me that the Green New Deal is in danger of being just used as a way to lure investors, who of course will be interested in profit, and also to give hope to the public, so that can act as a smokescreen that collapse isn't coming, collapse hasn't happened already. Yeah, it's very, very dangerous.
So if you don't mind, I'd like to stay there for just a few moments, because it's the whole notion of hope has been a reoccurring topic, well, for years, for the folks that have started this conversation, even decades ago. But more recently, there have been a few remarkable authors. Derek Jensen comes to mind, Deb Ozarko comes to mind, and a few others. And I'm curious if we could just spend a little time on this idea of hope. If I may, I'd like to start by just sharing this. I have many conversations with people. I call them my impossible conversations. And so often it starts with, I ask people when they say the word hope, which usually gets brought up early in the conversation, what they mean when they say hope. And to just lump many of them together, if I might, it comes out something like, gee, I hope the experts come up with answers to these pesky problems so that we can get on with and return to business and life as usual. I think that's what I'm reading when you poke at the word hope in, for instance, this piece on the Nothing Manifesto. What do you mean when you say the word hope?
It's kind of like a pill. It's a delusion pill. It's a drug. It's a way of kicking the can down the road. It's a way of, no, the house isn't on fire. It's not.
Right.
Yeah. Hope is a way of blinding yourself. And it's quite tragic that a species that is so intelligent is actually intelligent enough to deceive itself.
Yeah.
We have an amazing capacity to self-medicate, to be in denial, to have really, really complex mechanisms in our brain, which I always get some inspiration from my biology background. I call that homeostasis. And the example I always give is the RLC, which not many people know about, because the RLC, has almost disappeared. And humans, in the many decades that it took for the Aral Sea to disappear, simply got used to having less fish, having less water. There was no collapse. There was no perception of collapse. It was a slowly deteriorating change of life. Same with the Dust Bowl in the 1930s in the US. We just destroyed these ecosystems and we left. But the thing is, we can't leave now. We have nowhere to go because we're going to destroy the whole planet. But we're using the same mental mechanism of homeostasis, which I've written a full article about, the kind of pioneering, borrowing this biological term to describe a mental state. Also similar to hypernormalization, the famous Adam Prentice film, which I think that is also happening on the media landscape. On one hand, we have more awareness of climate change. On the other hand, climate change and movements like Extinction Rebellion just become a part of one's daily life, and we become desensitized to them.
Yeah.
This is a strategy that can be employed by the private sector, by governments, to further desensitize us and to say to us, yeah, okay, we're not denying it. Climate change, it is happening. It's very scary.
Yeah.
Because it really trips you.
Yeah. I'm with
I fear that at some point we might just say, well, collapse is happening.
Yeah. I'm completely in agreement with what you've just been laying out, and it reminds me of the shock that I felt in writing my own book, because it was shocking enough to discover not only the reality and the ever increasing reality of abrupt climate change, far beyond normal interpretations of climate change. And then on top of that, a handful of other extinction level measures of human impact on the planet. You know, my head was already exploding with all of that. And what I didn't expect, I had no idea how deeply I would be sucked into how we talk to ourselves, how we control ourselves in the narrative that we're living within. It started, you know, hundreds, perhaps thousands of years ago with the notions that became colonization and a profit orientation to a now predatory capitalist model and so on. And so we're firmly living in and ensconced in this structure, this rigidified structure.
Yeah,
that will
it's rigidified, and again from the biological perspective, and again I'm not an expert in this field, but to me it makes sense to think that our brain is rigid, and the reason our brain is rigid is because it evolved during thousands of years when the climate was stable, our resources were abundant, and there is no evolutionary development in the human brain to minimize risk and to apply brakes on the destructive processes that we use to exploit the resources around us. I've written many articles on this because that was the point where I kind of exploded. I've written an article called Our DNA Makes Us Destroy This Planet. I think it's titled something like Destroying the Planet is Our Destiny. And I unfortunately believe that. It is our destiny. Then again, we can change our biological destiny. So there is hope in that sense, but I think we do need to realize that the default path is actually to destroy the planet. If we do realize that, then hopefully we can scare ourselves enough to be able to wake up from this primitive mind that likes to take risk, that likes to take risk in the stock market, likes to take risk by waging war in the country next door to appropriate its resources, likes to take all kinds of risks in order to, to further itself, to use risk as a survival strategy, as opposed to using conservative approaches, circular approaches, degrowth approaches as a survival strategy. That is a revolutionary concept.
Yeah. What came forward for me when you were just speaking was there's an odd aggression that's showing up. And I wish I could say that it was the aggression between people who are solid denialists and then people who are aware of, the truth of what's going on in our Earth and human systems. But it's not that. Just in the past few months, in particular, there have been a number of examples of people who are really close to one another in terms of philosophical orientations, in terms of how we frame or see the world, that we have to do something about climate change, and this is very important, and some people are activists in that, and other people are academicians, and they're this far apart from one another. And this is where a new kind of aggression is showing up, a contrarianism of people who are so close in their orientation to life and in the frame of how they see the important issues that matter most to them. And it's fascinating to me, and it's heartbreaking to me that people can be so close to a common ground of seeing what's truly important in these times, and what will it take for us to survive, to possibly even thrive. And what it really comes down to me, is the willingness to declare or to just state that we are indeed in collapse, that there is some substantial part of our system at its core that has failed. And so that tiny difference between the people that I'm talking about, these are famous science communicators, people who are really good at what they do, communicating the extraordinarily difficult conversation about climate change, and people that are just an inch away from them on the spectrum. And what seems to be the difference is the ability to say, we've failed.
Yeah, because it is, and it will always be, a risky statement to make. And we unfortunately are individuals living within societies that a lot of things depend on what we say. A job, being trolled on the internet, being threatened. I have conversations with a few very small circle of climate scientists that I know, and the conversations that I have with them in private are completely different to their Twitter posts. in private, they tell me the world is coming to an end very soon. On Twitter and in public, they have, of course, a much more conservative stance. And this is where the greater factor comes in, you know, someone who doesn't have to obey, someone who is not being paid by anyone, who is unhinged in that sense, who has the freedom to say what they want to say. It's someone that broke through the barrier, that almost kind of opened up the floodgates for a lot of people to follow.
You know, it's interesting. I have had very few inner circle conversations like you're describing, where you've had some ability to speak with these people kind of offline, out of the public arena, and to be able to hear a different take on it. And I'm now wondering how much of that is so. I appreciate you bringing it up, and I guess I have some homework to do to see if I can find out some of those.
I think there's a very nice part in the interview that Naomi Klein gave to the BBC, I believe, or was it Channel 4, where at some point she's being asked a very good question by the journalist. So what do you think is going to happen? Are you an optimist or are you a pessimist? And I won't tell you what she answers, but it's a surprising and a slightly alarming answer, I think, that she gives. It was, for me, was a little bit more pessimistic than I thought. Yeah. But it is very brave, and very. I think it's the attitude that we should have. Really, we only have one Earth. Even if we think that, even if we know that, you know, 2 degrees change, 3 degrees change is already locked in. For me, personally, even if we can save one species on this planet, one dirty little piece of bacterium swimming in a slime pothole, that would be a victory.
Yeah.
If we can save that one piece of life, because that is how precious it is.
Yeah.
We don't know if there's other Earths out there. It's I think in the 80s, Carl Sagan, who thought there were a lot more, but now scientists are starting to understand that actually we might be quite rare.
Yeah. And that was a Channel 4 Naomi Klein interview, and that was fairly recent?
Yes, it was very recent. It's from a few weeks ago. I can send you a link.
Oh, well, thank you. I'd appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and excerpt from that interview, and I'll put it in right in this part of our conversation. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. You know, you might be headed now, George. You might just have headed into what is really the most important part for me of any of these conversations that I'm privileged to have, and that is there are times when I just need to slow down and realize what we're actually talking about. And it started to dawn on me as soon as you told the piece about Naomi Klein, and then this last piece you just shared. I never would have guessed, growing up in the world that I was privileged to grow up in, I never would have guessed that a part of my lifetime would be confronting what's now called the 6th mass extinction. And I
Yeah.
and I never thought that I would have conversations like this where, you know, little cute expressions like carpe diem and smell the roses and so on would shift from cute little greeting card expressions to really survival level coping strategies to keep ourselves present somehow in the face of ever larger stressors. And I'm curious if you would share a little bit about how, if you have your own version of a dynamic like I'm describing for myself, how has this realization of our situation, how has it landed on you? And how do you
Yeah.
carry it in your heart? How do you keep yourself inspired and connected with life while carrying this
I
in
think
your
it's
heart?
important to talk about this, and to talk about this a lot, because it really takes a toll on us, and it's you know, existential stress, existential anxiety. It's even in the news these days, and I do believe the polls that say that the young generation is really feeling that. Well, I'm of an older age group, so I grew up in a world where we were told that humanity improves with every decade, from industry to human rights to discoveries. The world, it just gets better and better. Look, there's Greenpeace now. They're chasing away the oil tankers in the ocean. It's, people are cleaning up the environment. It's all going to be great. Um, and then you come to the realization that there's climate change. As a scientist, I was um, I had my big wake-up call in 2007, back then with Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. That was kind of the definitive evidence for me. Um, uh, and then I think a couple of years ago was when I had a second realization that we were not on a long-term journey. This is actually quite short-term. It's accelerating. In human years, it might be a few generations, but in geological timescales, this is absolutely, um, uh, it's a snapshot. I've written about this as well. It's like when you've put the egg on a pan, and the pan is hot, and you've thrown the egg on the pan. The egg is still transparent, and that is what gives the climate change deniers the opportunity to say, look, nothing's happening. The egg is fine.
Yeah.
But just check, a millionth of a second or whatever it is later, and you've got this change. It is, and I've talked about this, I've written about this, because we need to keep ourselves sane if we have any chance of working towards mitigating what's coming. I think that the existential stress that we are under is a cocktail of feelings that has never existed before. Psychotherapy was not meant to help people through existential stress, because this is not about a fear that will not materialize. This is a fear about something that will happen, that will come, of unpredictable ways in which it might arrive into your world, to your family, your children, or the children of your children. And it is an emotional roller coaster, I would have to say, has been from my part. And I think this is a very, very common thing. You go through stages of grief, of anger, of depression, of sadness. And at the end of the day, the best, I think, arrival point is that, you know what? The end of the world is actually coming. I think for me, just being aware of that and actually feeling it in my body helped me. I wrote another article at some point where I put some pictures in it, which were pictures from strange times in human history, from the Dark Ages or from the Catholic churches, and they are pictures of the apocalypse. You might know a painter called Hieronymus Bosch, who is very famous about those things. And I thought, for me, that was sort of the realization point that we grew up thinking that the apocalypse was this sci-fi kind of religious, and it's now happening. It is actually happening.
Yeah.
It is actually happening. And it also, it kind of made me think that we somehow always knew. Those paintings now are a bitter irony, aren't they? I find them quite a bitter irony because they're quite telling.
Yeah. You know, it's just a pleasure to speak with you, George. That what I mentioned at the beginning, that was the original reason why I reached out to connect with you, was your blend of an artfulness and heart, with also a real eye for piercing analysis of what's going on, and being able to put the two together. And again, I just really respect and appreciate that gift of being able to blend those pieces the way you do. And then thank you for what you've just gotten through saying, a little bit of a snapshot of your, how you map this out, how you position yourself or find yourself in what I call an internal mapping of how do I make sense of this world as it's laying out, and what are my reactions that want to just come up naturally, and what are the reactions that I aspire to. I was hearing you share a little bit of each of those, and I thank you for that. And I'm curious if you could shift gears to speak to other people who don't necessarily have the background of either just the skill of writing and that kind of mapping and articulating, but also don't necessarily have the kind of scientific background and acuity that you also have. I'm wondering if you could offer any suggestions for folks who would like to bridge from whatever their world is, whatever they've grown up with, and the people who are just really bumping into, there are big troubles going on in this world. Something is really not right. They might, again, they say it in their own way. They might have a simpler version of it, but they just know in their gut that things are not okay. Are there any elements that you could share that could help them bridge to a new way of holding or seeing this world?
The problem is that we are all at different levels of realization, and it also does take some time to go through the brief. We're at different stages of having gone through. And I myself, I sometimes alternate between grief and denial and optimism and pessimism and that kind of overwhelming existential cocktail of feelings. But I think that what we can all have in common is that recognizing that we are in a situation, because I think very few people now deny it. I think some people haven't consciously accepted it because they are afraid, but that is becoming a minority as well. And I think that forgiveness is a really important thing. As much as I think that we are a predatory species and our DNA has made us really have the destruction of the planet as our destiny, that was not our fault. That's how we evolved on this planet. I think that we just need to recognize that, move on, forgive ourselves, so that we can have the strength to minimize any of the damage that we can.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you do.
Yeah.
And just stay close with other people, even if it's close family environment that finds this conversation a bit too strange or daunting. Stay close to them.
Mm-hmm.
Because the thing is that we cannot rely on a minority of, white middle-aged academics to save the world. We need to somehow reach out to everyone and realize that this is a social crisis. It's the way that we have set up our economic system to depend on exploiting other people. I wrote another article recently saying that racism is actually a natural resource. It's what colonialism and capitalism has depended on for cheap labor. And this is what has caused the consumption. And this is what has caused CO2. There is a way to reverse this, which is to be happy with less stuff. If we all do it at the same time, then we won't be jealous of each other's belongings, and we won't need big salaries.
Yeah.
At least that's the idea of degrowth.
Right. It also wouldn't hurt to reposition ourselves with regard to taking a stand for a universal standard of living around the world, which I hear hints of, and particularly in your article, The Nothing Manifesto, which again, I'll put the link to, with a number of very simple but profound elements that you are suggesting would assist us in a transition to some sort of alternative to this hyper consumptive world that we have all grown up in with the Nothing Manifesto. George, it's just been an absolute pleasure to speak with you, and I just feel like I'm lucky to be able to reach out and meet folks like yourself who have truly something to say in this, which I believe is the most important conversation that humanity has ever had to face. And it again is just a particular pleasure to find someone who brings the amount of heart and artfulness that you do. I look forward to more and more conversations of this type as time goes on. And thank you so much for spending your time with us on the Poetry of Predicament.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And this has been really, really fun for me as well.
Yeah. Well, I hope to see you over at the Deep Adaptation Forum sometime soon.
Absolutely. The conversation continues.
All right. Thank you again, George. Take good care of yourself.
Take care.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.